Hello and welcome to a very serious episode of B&T TV. It is The Debate. Here I'm joined by two members from the Industry Debate Club, Jackie and Caitlin. So the motion today is government legislation in advertising causes more harm than good. Jackie will be arguing for this motion and Caitlin against. Let's start the debate.
So sure, we all want safeguards and a level playing field when we're discussing this topic, but I want you guys to consider the flip side. While government legislation is well-intentioned, it can yield adverse consequences to our freedom of speech, limiting what we hear and see out there. And what about all the creativity that underpins our industry? Over-regulation can smother innovation, it snuffs out the genius ad campaigns we love, and essentially can hinder economic growth. Keeping also another kicker to consider, the industry is not sitting idle. Self-regulation is the name of the game, and businesses are now stepping up to keep themselves more accountable for their own advertising practices. And whether we care to admit it or not, too many rules can give birth to unintended consequences, such as black markets of unregulated alternatives. So let's tread cautiously here. While regulation does aim to protect, we must consider the arguments that suggest excessive government intervention can often cause more harm than good.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Coming to you now, Caitlin.
Thank you. I am here to oppose this statement vehemently. Government intervention in Australian advertising standards is not just beneficial, but it is vital for the welfare of our society. It ensures that corporations and brands play fair, adhering to ethical guidelines and preventing misleading practices that could in effect harm us, because the truth of the matter is that advertising works, and that's why we're all here. Take advertising junk food to children as an example. Advertising misleading or false information or promoting products that manipulate impressionable and vulnerable audiences. There's only a threat to the bottom line of organisations who stand to profit from damage to the community.
Thank you very, very much. So I'm going to ask you both a question now, which comes up a lot when we sort of debate these kind of issues. So you mentioned there, Jackie, kind of about free will, and I guess it's the consumers should be able to choose things that are sort of bad for them. If we talk about things like gambling, and you mentioned junk foods there, whose responsibility is it ultimately to look after their health and make them decisions? Is it the advertisers or is it ultimately the individual?
I think it's probably a combination of both, but I would like to emphasise that at the end of the day, consumers have the right, especially companies that are legal in the business, they have the right to inform their consumers of products and services, irrespective of what category. And then therefore consumers are well informed to then make their own decisions, whether that be what we consider people who are a bit more vulnerable because they're under 18, for example, and they need parental control. And I really want to go back to my point around self-regulation. Businesses nowadays, they're more smarter, they're more equipped. They know consumers are not stupid anymore, that they're well informed and they can make their own decisions. So because of that, they've also had an extra layer of regulation reforms. They're more compliant nowadays because our advertising industry has made a big push for transparency in advertising. So because of that, I think advertisers are stepping up to the game. They're self-regulating themselves, so there doesn't need to be this extra layer of government legislation. And then on top of that, consumers are becoming more informed. The competitiveness of our marketplace has given them more education around these things. So it's like they have a bi-directional relationship in that way.
And you, Caitlin?
Look, I think that advertising self-regulation can only go so far. There's a number of public health challenges that are posed by the industries of the likes of gambling, if we take that as an example. There's effectively a lot of misinformation, I think, as a consumer who is watching a sports game, or we take, for example, how amazing the Matildas is right now, but there's also stories. I've come into the office today and people have told me how much they've won over betting last night. It is, there's a severe amount of health consequences that are far beyond the consequences of industries and organisations that are simply going to follow a similar trajectory to the likes of the tobacco industry. I think ultimately information is shared with us as consumers in ways that benefit organisations. And I think the things that we're not informed about is how sporting and regulations and how sporting industries are actually profiting from the investment of the gambling industry outside of pure advertising. Football Australia, they make 1% of every bet that is placed in this sporting category. So it's simply not a matter of putting the power in the consumer. We have to take the control back to the government.
So it's not a good thing if your colleague won money on the Matildas?
Look, it is in the sense of I support the Matildas vehemently, but it's the health consequences that come with it. There's so many statistics around gambling suffering and, the link between gambling and, really poor health consequences. So I don't support it.
Okay, you're now going to get the chance to ask each other questions. So Jackie, what question would you like to ask Caitlin?
I guess, Caitlin, what I want to ask you is, although you say that gambling can be detrimental to people and the practices around it, but what do you think about excessive regulation in that industry? You mentioned also the tobacco industry. Advertising has been banned in the tobacco industry, and as a result of that, we saw a massive influx in other alternatives, such as e-cigarettes. The vaping economy has gone super massive now, and we don't know the health risk associated to that. So at the end of the day, it can basically bore unintended consequences because of regulation. So just your viewpoints around that.
Look, I don't think regulation really necessarily equates causation of those two streams of impacts. I think ultimately we're a society that we want to do things that are a bit naughty for ourselves. We seek out adventure, we seek out thrills, we seek out states of mind that, we think of tobacco, we think of alcohol, we think of gambling. All of these things aren't really good for us, and that's why they need to be regulated, because the alternative is really crippling health impacts. And I think that, smoking rates really plummeted as a result of the ban in advertising, as well as, we take the removal of imagery and branding on cigarette packets as well. And that had a huge impact on the reduction in youth smoking in Australia alone. But, if we fast forward now to this digital age, looking at gambling in Australia, in Victoria alone, 978 gambling ads air on TV each day, and 1 in 4 children can name 4 gambling brands. Now, I think that is a cause, really, for enough of a concern to have some sort of level of regulation. Not only that, we're losing the largest volume of money to gambling in the world. And I think that, we live in a place where we're not an autocracy. We have a government that has ethical standards, and we have a government that is, really here for the benefits of our society. And ultimately, we have to have some kind of level of faith to ensure that regulation doesn't necessarily go down that path of absolute wash of no black and whites or grey areas within, these kinds of rules and laws. But ultimately, they're here to help us and to help to deliver on positive health impact.
Okay, then what's your one question or 1.5 question maybe that you want to ask Jackie?
Look, I think my question really is to think about the true societal CPM that comes with an unregulated sector. Surely that, these ads that we have that are advertising things that are really negative to our health, then surely not good for our ecosystem. So how much are you really willing to tolerate without government legislation?
I think it'll just come down to individual choice and, again, the freedom of expression. People are capable of making their own decisions on what they do with their leisure time and their money. And we've got to remember that people react differently to advertisements out there. Not all of them will have problematic relationships based on their personal experience, attitudes and values. And I know you've given some really massive stats on the gambling sector, but it does contribute to 4% of our total GDPR and employs more than 200,000 people in the sector, which again kind of will hinder economic growth as we pivot out of that. And then back to the tobacco example too. Smoking rates actually increased because there were other alternatives coming into the market. Although we did reduce tobacco, when we did ban those advertisements, smoking rates still came up. So what I'm essentially saying, even though you can ban heavily regulated industries such as gambling, there will be another form that will pop up. And then we are still not addressing the underlying issue when we try to over-legislate in that way. So yeah, just really around individual choice and then people making their decisions on how they react to advertising out there.
I'm going to ask maybe a final, given our audience are people that work within the advertising industry. So generally, we do know that the advertising industry makes a lot of money. I think it's 360 million. I'll double check that and put it in a footer from gambling. And there's not necessarily the replacements for that right now. So obviously, if it was banned, we could potentially see job losses and all the kind of dark things that people don't want to talk about. I mean, do you still think it'd kind of be beneficial in the long term if that were the case?
Look, I think coming from a planning and buying background, I know that often brands are really priced out of sporting sponsorships, of integration opportunities that do really help to build their brand profiles. And I go back to my statement that advertising absolutely works, and that's why it's such hot property. I think that if, taking gambling as the example, if it were to be removed, reduced, regulated, it can open doors for other industries and other advertisers that may not have those same budgets, but the sum of all of those parts is surely achievable in a realm where there is stand for profit for broadcasters and sports bodies. So I think ultimately it will take a long time to reform, but I do think that there's certainly budgets out there outside of gambling conglomerates.
And Jackie, any final thoughts around that kind of, could there be potentially replacements to gambling income?
More so, I guess it's going back to the creativity in our industry and how if we do over-regulate different industries, it will essentially stifle our innovation to come up with newer campaigns. Money does in our industry, I believe, go around. In like new and upcoming startups and small businesses come up and break into the barriers, so it will move around, but I think it might stifle our creativity. All the new genius like ad campaigns that we love at the heart and core of it will kind of disappear when people try to over-regulate certain industries too. So I think it will have an impact if legislation is coming into effect, but I think it's just more around stifling creativity and innovation.
So I just wanted to see, Jackie, what's your kind of like final point? Why should people pick your side?
I think why you guys should pick my side is basically because freedom is just not a word. It's the heartbeat of innovation, especially in our industry and in advertising. And then also in terms of over-regulation too, like a really famous American politician and activist, Lawrence Lessig, have said that over-regulation can stifle creativity and it can also snuff out innovations, which will essentially have a halo effect on our economic growth and the diverse marketplace we have of products and services. So really, government legislation shouldn't be so over-regulated, especially in advertising.
And why should people pick your side, Caitlin?
Look, I think it's down to ethics and values. I think ultimately government positions, particularly in Australia where we live in freedom of rights and decisions that sit outside of just what we're exposed to in advertising, we do we do make informed decisions on purchase behaviours, but ultimately these ads can be really overbearing, and they can, really tap into a lot of different psyches that we know and love as a part of this advertising industry. But ultimately, regulation is here to help us, and it's here to really prevent the bottom dollar coming back from us as taxpayers. I think the health implications is ultimately what we want to help to prevent as a part of regulation and standards.
So here at B&T, we are very, very, very democratic, which means that this debate is going to be left up to you. So you can vote with what side you're on. A reminder, the motion is government legislation in advertising causes more harm than good. And arguing that, we have Jackie on this side. So if you agree with Jackie, vote affirmative. And then arguing against, we have Caitlin. So if you agree with Caitlin, vote opposition. The vote is up to you. So if you vote on the poll underneath, we will release the results next week. This is B&T TV. Thank you so much for watching. So both of our contestants today are from the industry-wide debate club, which is supported by IAB. It gives everyone of all levels in the industry the chance to think about these ideas and ultimately argue them against each other. So why did you join the debate club?
Orshi, the founder of Debate Club, I used to work with her once, and I know her passion about exploring different ways of thinking, exploring critical thinking, which is really important to us. After my trip from Bali, my team has chucked me under the bus and said, you may join the Debate Club to explore that critical thinking. So yeah, I'm all for these industry events, and it's also a good opportunity to meet new people. So I highly encourage it.
You just came back from Bali. You relaxed, okay? You relax. You were allowed to get stressed. And you, Caitlin?
I definitely echo Jackie. And I think just to add to that, the opportunity to discuss really pivotal topics such as this and, debate in ways that see multiple sides to a story of, what we may all be thinking as an industry collectively, to really kind of, share oppositions and opposing opinions. It does help to form your structure and your narrative when you are kind of working with clients or with your internal teams and things like that. There's multiple benefits to being able to flex a muscle of using your voice. So yeah, definitely to echo Jackie, but yeah, to have this experience is great.